About 20 years ago, I was visiting my friend in Slovenia, in a very picturesque village. You, Mr. Peterles, surely know this is Rečica of Savini. It's a very small village. And I was shocked that I met an elderly English couple living there. They came from Manchester to live there. I asked them, why did you move? England is a nice country and so on. And what shocked me, they said, no, we cannot live anymore there. There are too many Arabs. We cannot live there. We came here and we found that the cultural differences are very small. We enjoy living in Slovenia. And I started to think, what it is? What is the problem? And last few years, we all read the newspapers. There are different separatistic movements. Recently, I think these days, we have elections in Catalonia. We are facing Brexit. I started to think, are we going to have Balkanization of Europe or European Union? We in Yugoslavia, we faced this, unfortunately, 20 years ago. And we know this disaster, especially if it's done by force. So I decided to talk about this, to see whether they are really moving towards Balkanization of Europe. Can cultural diplomacy help to prevent this? We can read in our newspapers or see on TV some statements for politicians that say multiculturalism has failed. Is it true? When we talk about this, usually we think how to protect minorities, different kind of minorities, but in this context, usually we talk about ethnic minorities. And usually we say the causes of ethnic conflicts in multi-ethnic societies come from political discrimination of minorities. They don't participate in public life, in politics, and so on, and so they feel that are strange. I spent 7 years in Singapore working in a research institute. Singapore is known as a very prosperous country, but without much democracy. But believe me, we couldn't interfere in the local politics, and I didn't feel anything against this. I don't care. So I don't think that it's a very important issue. Probably economical discrimination is the issue, because if you don't have appropriate jobs or you don't have the equal rights on your job and so on, you can feel badly as a minority and so on. So I can understand that it can cause ethnic conflicts. But social cultural discrimination is even more dangerous, especially at the beginning when there are language barriers. Then we have religions, different religions, whether we are tolerant for different religions, local customs, our customs, and so on. But what I learned in Singapore that they have 3 ethnic groups, but they coexist, they live nicely. They don't interfere to each other, they share many things together. We as foreigners were there, no pressure, no interference. Everything was smoothly. But one of the reasons is economic prosperity. That's one of the drivers, I would say, for coexistence. So, is it enough that we talk about protection of minority? I think we have to do it, but it's not all. Why we now have these strange elections results in Europe? You see a political shift towards the right, pro-nationalistic right. Parties are winning and so on. Obviously, citizens of Europe are reacting mostly to a wave of immigrants and so on. Why is it happening? Probably we missed to think about protection also of majority rights. What the majority, indigenous majority, is feeling when they're faced to the fact they are not used to, that they have to change and accept different cultures, different habits, customs. They have to share something that they used not to share, so on. So I think that we have to talk, and when we think how to organize our civil society, we have also to try to find a balance between protection of minority but also protection of majority, because especially if the minority is not ready, if you're coming to a country, you have to think about local population. You have to adopt in the sense that respect their customs, their culture, and not to be very aggressive. When we were living in Singapore, it was a small Serbian community. We met every weekend, barbecue parties and so on. But we were very careful not to interfere to local community affairs and not to interrupt their customs and so on, not to be very aggressively show that we are different, so on. No, it's wrong. So we must respect the host country, host people, and try to avoid that they see us that we are very different, so on. Because we came to their country, we have to respect. We cannot expect that we have all the same right as they have. So when we talk about equality, and we must know that there are some constraints on that. Unfortunately, it's enough that few percent of a local minority is aggressive and make problems. We have problems. We faced this in Yugoslavia, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina. People used to live together nicely from different ethnic groups, religions. But in each of the ethnic groups, there are some crazy guys that wanted to make conflicts because they have different interests, or they're religious or ideological blindness and so on, and they can spoil everything. So it's very dangerous. It's a very fragile piece, in a sense, when you have a multicultural environment that are not stable enough. So what are my recommendations to avoid the Balkanization of Europe? In general, of course, we have to promote tolerance and multiculturalism. We have to respect differences, nurture the similarities. We have to promote society based on mutual respect, where each group retains its own distinct character, but practice mutual collaboration. Social inclusion should be the solution, not segregation. So this is in general, but what in practice we should do? I identify 5, I call it drivers for multiculturalism. First, we should develop interest for coexistence, interests of different groups, minority, majority groups. And we start with the simplest thing. It's trading. Let's trade between different ethnic groups, between different states or regions or countries. When traders are meeting, they speak the same language, the language of interest. They don't care about other things. And contacts are very important. As Lisa mentioned this morning, contacts are very important, because if we don't meet each other, we don't talk each other, it's totally different. We in Serbia now have experience at universities with the Erasmus Plus program. At the beginning, I was a little bit surprised. What so many travels, what so many partners these are necessary. But after a while, I realized why it's necessary. We meet our colleagues from different universities. We exchange our view. We feel all richer and closer to each other. And that's the one of benefit of such contacts. The second driver is education. Everything starts from education, but there are two paths. Also separatists and problem makers are also trying to use education to prepare future generation for fights and so on. But there are another paths, it's always multiculturalism. So how to organize education to not to promote the first but the second path? I think that we have to promote multilingual education, no segregation of school. In Serbia, some minorities are advocating to have their own schools, primary schools, secondary schools, now even university. I don't think that is good practice. We should share the classes together and use different languages. In former Yugoslavia, we made a mistake. We in Serbia didn't learn Slovenian, Macedonians. They had to learn Serbian, but we had not. This mistake. I think we should all learn different languages. I meet Serbs from Kosovo. Most of them don't speak Albanian. I cannot understand. You used to live for decades there and you don't speak to each other. It's wrong. And education was supporting this. It's a segregation, it's not integration. So we need a concept of integration in school, not segregation. The second in education is to use non-formal education, not only formal. When we talk about formal, I think about all levels, from kindergarten to university. Integrated concept, not disintegration concept. But for normal education, for non-formal education, we have to promote tolerances and multiculturalism using seminars, symposia, courses, workshops, forums, conferences. It's all those mechanisms that we meet, events that we can meet, discuss, and exchange views, and make public opinion about similarities, not talk too much about differences. If we talk about difference, ethnic difference, the only 2-3 attributes, as I would say, are different. Probably my ethnic origin and religion. All other, probably hundreds of them, are very similar. We all struggle for better life. We have different jobs, different problems, different wishes, and so on. So many more similarities than differences. So let's identify similarities and talk about similarities and about the future, how to live better together, not to focus on differences. But in order to do that, we have to meet and discuss. The third driver, I call it social cohesion and tolerance for cultural diversity. We have to protect also collective rights of minorities, but also rights of the majority, as in many cases the majority is indigenous. In some environment, indigenous ethnic groups or population. So in order to avoid such tensions as we now have in some towns in Europe because of immigrants, I think we have to avoid it by integrating all these minorities in society and balance between their habits, their culture. They have to maintain this, but not to respect also the local people and so on. So to find the harmony in this and the balance. The wisdom of life is the balance in every area. So no extremes are good. So they make tensions. The fourth driver is democracy. All conflicts should be solved peacefully and by implementing democratic mechanisms. For instance, when I say protection of minority using democracy, it doesn't mean that we only talk about ethnic minorities. I will give an example about political minorities in Serbia. Just recently, you can imagine in our parliament last week, 30 laws were adopted after 5 hours of discussion according to some procedures, 30 law, and one of them were the budget, very important law. After discussion in general, and after discussion of governmental representatives, 5 hours are over, and my political minority in the parliament even couldn't say anything. Not only about the law of budget, but the remaining 29 laws. The same mechanism was implemented a month ago when we adopted the law for higher education. Deputies had no time to discuss about this law because the government majority put several other laws for secondary education and so on. So after 5 hours discussion about the secondary law, they had no time to talk about higher education law. And they also say, that's what we are going to practice in future. So they want to shut up oppositions, even in the parliament. So what is the reaction? Of course, it makes tensions, unnecessary tension in political life of Serbia. We have to talk, to argument, but not to use different tricks to avoid opposition talks, even in the parliament. So obviously, the lack of democracy is also something that can be very dangerous. So promoting democracy is one of the drivers to develop multiculturalism. And finally, the rule of law. Everybody should be equally protected, and of course, no corruption, no monopolies, no untouchable. Probably in many countries it's more or less much better situation, but believe me, in Serbia it's not like that. We feel the differences. There are non-touchables. There are a lot of monopolies. I don't want to go into details, but obviously the rule of law is missing. So we need a lot to work in order to achieve it. Cultural diplomacy should play a significant role, in my opinion, to build support for tolerance of cultural diversity. Thank you.